we're always talking about utilities and the susceptibility of our critical infrastructure to cyber attacks and different cybersecurity measures they need to take. What's your perspective on how the renewable energy industry could also be focused on this? Because it's not as often in that conversation.
Yeah, it isn't as often in the conversation. It should be. Renewable energy is a critical part of our energy supply and is growing. And it's for that reason I believe it needs to be part of it. The tax that we have, the focus is not a today focus, it's a today ongoing focus. And if you're looking at the rate of investment, the rate of change, renewable energies is where the most growth is happening. And so that means it's going to not only raise as a target even more and more than it is today, but it actually has its own sets of vulnerabilities and its own unique areas that need to have a lot of attention paid. For example, there's a lot more obviously new technology in renewables than in many of the other sectors. Well, attackers feed off technology. That's where they want to go. That's what they attack, particularly in the industrial side of things. Also, that rate of growth means when things are growing rapidly, it's very hard to manage the cybersecurity risk. Everyone is quickly building, trying to get the next thing out, trying to get the next innovation going. Cybersecurity sometimes is hard to keep up with that kind of change. And so there's a gap in there that needs to be addressed, and that's unique to the renewable area and new renewable space. So I would say that has to be part of the conversation because there's very unique features in that. Not to mention things like it's usually more remote, more spread out, more digitized, more controlled from a central location. So if you just look at the way it's actually configured, many parts of the renewable equation have to be accounted for differently than other parts of the sector. But that makes it that much more important to start paying attention to it right now.
And feel free to dive even a layer further down too, because our audience is well aware of their systems and their asset bases. So I'm curious if you have any specifics on those vulnerabilities, whether it's, I don't know, asset management, the assets themselves, where do we see that?
Asset inventory, asset management is one of the key pieces. I mean, I know it seems like one of the places to start, but knowing what you have to protect is a huge deal. And when you're expanding and growing and rapidly putting things out, even that basic step is a challenge. It's not always done. And I would start actually with that. What do you need to protect? Get it in front of it. Have that as an automated, not a manual process. It's not even pragmatic in many times to do that, but you can't do that manually. And if you do, it's not effective. You need to figure out an automated way to do that. But then vulnerability management, right? Staying ahead of the next question, which is if I know what to protect, where are my holes? And then you're looking at different types of configuration management or management of change. Again, if bad guy wants to change something, he's going to change the configuration of how a SCADA system works or something works in that system. And so you're going to have to know, if there's an unauthorized change going on. And then last piece is the monitoring or anomaly detection, the kinds of things that you need to understand if something's happening. But sometimes people skip to the monitoring piece or they skip another step, but all those pieces fit together. If an attack happens and I have a great asset inventory, right, and I know what they can attack next, I know what vulnerabilities they could be using, I'm a lot faster in my response than if I just have one piece of that equation. But that takes domain expertise. You don't just take, let's say, an IT shop and say, okay, protect my ICS or my industrial assets. You now are, somehow magic wand. Now you are an expert in the OT space. You need people who understand operational technology, they understand cybersecurity, and they understand how these attacks evolve and staying ahead of it because these attacks are adapting all the time. And so I'd offer those parts of the equation. Start with the basics, really focus on domain expertise, and understand how you put that all together.
I'm interested what you think about this too, just in hearing you describe the inventory and where you're vulnerable. Would there be concerns on the renewable side with utility integration as well? Because we know that utilities and critical infrastructure seem to be those main targets of attackers right now. Would that be something that a renewable generator or developer would also need to think about in how they're interconnected with maybe a larger entity like a grid scale utility?
Sure. I mean, anytime you connect with anything, there's a point of attack, right? There's a point of entry both ways. They can go through you over there, and vice versa. And so you're going to have to understand how those attacks evolve to what you're connected and what you're connected to. So we look at things from what we call an FCI model, F being functions, but C in that model is being connections. What are you connected to? So functions, how critical is an asset or something happening? C is what is it connected to? And I is identity. What are the identities, both people, but digital identities that have access to that? If you kind of look at it from that perspective, you can understand what the risk equation is for any particular component. Then you look at it at the systems level. So back to your point, how does that connect with anything that was out there, and particularly as I'm trying to integrate into larger utilities, would be an area that of concern.
And as ABS is taking on renewable clients, I keep asking about renewables because that is,
No,
that's our base. So I am going to hone in on that. But any client. So when you're coming in the door for the first time, what is the current state of cybersecurity and protection when you're having those initial conversations with a new client? Is it getting better? Is it still pretty far off from where we need to be?
It is pretty far off from where we need to be. I will say that. I will say that in the last 6 months, it has been certainly much more of a conversation where before it may not even have been in the conversation. I would say there's some different parts of the discussion that are happening now, particularly at the board level. So board levels will often get right now, because of all the attacks in critical infrastructure, is hits the news, goes to board level. Board says, okay, what do we need to do? And sometimes there's been a little bit of misunderstanding. I'm not sure where the dynamic comes in, but people will say, well, we're doing okay because we protected ourselves against ransomware. Or the IT person set up, and usually on the IT side, they're doing pretty well, doing okay, right? And they'll go through all the things that they're doing. And the board level says, oh, then I guess we're protected, thumbs up, move on, let's keep on going. What they're not asking, the questions they're not asking at that level, is about the ICS, the industrial side, right? The OT side. And the OT side is a giant lag behind the IT side. IT side, most companies do, I would say, at least okay. I would say most companies I speak with on the OT side cannot answer my first question. Do you know what assets you need to protect? Do you really have a cybersecurity plan? Do you know your vulnerabilities? All these types of basic blocking and tackling pieces, we're just starting to get into now. It's one of the reasons we launched an OT specific managed service not very long ago for that actual problem. There's this gap in there, and people don't focus on OT, and they kind of use the IT equation to do it. Now, ransomware is a real thing. IT is a real issue, and sometimes there's bleed over into OT for sure. But they're also seeing in a number of arenas that people are starting to realize, gee, I can attack the OT directly. I don't have to just go through IT. And when you have something like Colonial Pipeline out there, it was a warning bell for the industry, for sure. That's why we're getting the conversations. But you have to remember, it was a dinner bell for the bad guys. They looked at it and said, oh, wait, I can have cyber physical impacts. I can shut down the pipeline. I can affect these pieces. Well, that's all these industries, including renewables. We're saying, wait, what can I do now? And they're starting to learn and adapt to that environment. So that risk now is starting to go up higher and higher, but the movement of people trying to do something is still pretty slow. So they're adapting, we're evolving, and there's a gap.
Yeah, it was always that kind of corny phrase of the next war will be cyber, and then it becomes fairly real when you can't get gas to the eastern seaboard for
well, that's
for
the
2
kind
weeks.
Of thing. But then everyone goes, "What can I do?" Now I know that was an IT attack, but that IT system had an operational impact because of how closely they were tied. So then everyone jumps on the last fight.
That
Right.
interconnection conversation.
Exactly. And so then everyone says, okay, well, I got mine. I got that one covered. So I'm set. I'm like, do not fight if you're in a war, do not fight the last fight. Fight the next one, right? See where they're going. They will fill the space that is available to them. Attackers will do that. The space available to them is this OT. The space available to them is these renewables. These vulnerabilities that are in the ICS. They will fill that space.
President Biden met yesterday. What is the date? August 25th. Just in case I publish this down the road, with energy and technology CEOs about cybersecurity. How would you say this administration is approaching cybersecurity in comparison to previous?
Well, I would think that any administration right now, not just the Biden administration, is facing a new set of challenges. Right, there's a lot more attacks happening. If you could see over on a critical infrastructure, it's that drumbeat is fairly steady. And then when you have a large impact attack like Colonial, but some of the other ones that happen, the water supply, you got the meat packing, different areas, right? You've got these different areas of critical infrastructure. What's happening again is then, I believe the administration is reacting, saying, "Oh my gosh, we have to get serious about this." More serious than it has been. And not that's not been there in the past or anything else. I just think the threat environment is now changing and become much more focused. Therefore, there needs to be a reaction to it. But that's good that they're doing that. But we believe that that private sector actually needs to come in, and the market drivers have to be the driver that does change. It's not a government or administrative thing. You can't regulate your way to security. You can regulate your way to maybe compliance, but that doesn't necessarily make you very secure. And
Yeah,
so,
President mentioned that too, and we know that regulations and policies are usually 5 to 10 years behind,
well, that
typically
was another,
what the state of the
yeah,
market is.
yeah. No, we just wrote a piece that says, look, if you're going to rely on over reliance on regulations have their spot. Make sure that there's a framework and there's a minimum. That's cool. Like, make sure that people understand there's some things doing, but they're designed for the minimum. They're designed for the lowest common denominator. They're supposed to be binary. Do you do something? Do you not? Because they're trying to apply to the entire industry, many, many companies. That if you over rely on that and say, hey, let's go do that regulatory environment, you're actually more exposed in some ways because you have this false sense of security, like, check the box, I'm all set. But many, many people can tell you they can be fully compliant and not very secure. It's not only, though, a call, what we believe, it's not just a call to the private sector. The actual battle is being fought in their systems. Right? There's no like magic cone the government can put over their systems. It's being fought in there. That means the risk is theirs. And furthermore, we believe that it's market drivers that will make the real change. It's the only thing that actually will. So take it this way. If I make cybersecurity part of my market valuation, if I make cybersecurity part of a competitive advantage, I can't bid on stuff, or my competitor will be valued higher than I in a bidding situation. I will now do the most. If I do it only because the government told me to, I will do the least. So the idea is that the real emphasis here is to work this in, the kind of piece that we're missing is to work this in to the core market drivers, valuation, insurance, when you're talking about the RFP or bidding process, supply chain, everyone in the supply chain should look to their left and say, okay, anyone who's giving me or supplying me, I now care about cybersecurity for your bid. I've been there. I've been in the room where a company has not been able to bid because they had bad cybersecurity and they weren't able to bid. People who ran into that room were the head of sales and head of operations. And they were pounding on tables saying, we have to fix our cybersecurity. It's that kind of market drivers that's going to happen. So the administration, absolutely calling together industry, trying to do stuff. That's great. But until this gets into a core market driver arena, you're going to operate at the speed of government, not at the speed of cyber. And so we're saying, guys, we're asking the wrong questions about regulations and those pieces. It's actually, the fight's over here.